You know, when we're faced with a massive, like, life-altering problem, human nature instinctively looks for a massive, awe-inspiring solution.
Right. It just makes sense to us.
Yeah, exactly. If the crisis is enormous, the cure has to be equally spectacular. Like, if you get a terrifying diagnosis, you want the absolute top specialist in the world,
You
right?
know, absolutely. You want the cutting-edge experimental technology.
You want the grand, dramatic intervention. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the breakthrough you actually need isn't found in a grand gesture at all?
Yeah, that is the really uncomfortable question here.
Right. What if it's found in something so simple, so mundane, and honestly so humiliating that your ego almost refuses to let you accept it? So welcome to this deep dive. Today we're exploring a really fascinating paradox about human success, the destructive nature of pride, and what it actually takes to find spiritual and emotional health.
It is such a profound paradox. I mean, we're looking at some deeply compelling material today that takes an ancient narrative and uses it as a mirror, to reflect some very uncomfortable truths about modern society.
And the human ego.
Exactly. The core argument we're wrestling with is that the solutions we most desperately need in life are often the exact ones our pride most aggressively resists.
Yeah, and there's this incredible visual breakdown we were looking at while preparing for this, and it maps out the whole concept using these really striking equations.
Oh, I loved that infographic.
It's so good. On one side, it literally draws a direct line between pride and death like a target on your back.
Right.
But on the flip side, there's this water drop showing how humility leads to grace, a plus sign for wash and be clean, and then this person icon for strip to be restored. And the whole thing culminates in this one bold claim. It says, grace is waiting at the bottom.
That phrase, grace is waiting at the bottom, it completely upends the fundamental way we think about elevation and success.
It really does.
Because from the time we're kids, we're taught to climb, to achieve, reach the top, curate your image. But the argument here is that true restoration requires moving in the exact opposite direction. You don't climb to find grace. You descend.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the idea that divine elevation requires human humiliation is, well, it's a tough pill to swallow.
It's terrifying, honestly.
Yeah. So we're going to investigate how that works and why it's so profoundly difficult for us to accept. And the material illustrates this whole dynamic through a very specific ancient case study, the story of a man named Naaman from the biblical book of 2 Kings.
And Naaman is just the perfect protagonist for this because he is like the ultimate archetype of worldly success.
Right.
He's the commander of the Syrian army. And historically, he's described as a great and honorable man, a mighty man of valor. He has unimaginable wealth, the absolute favor of his king, a string of military victories.
By every single external metric, this guy has won at life. To put it in modern terms, Naaman is the guy with the perfectly curated existence.
Yeah.
He's the billionaire CEO with the flawless public brand. Or think of the influencer posting pictures from a luxury yacht in the Mediterranean.
Wearing the ultimate uniform of success.
Right, and there's a massive but in Naaman's biography. The text actually reads, he was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper.
Yeah.
It's this fatal flaw hidden right beneath the medals. So how are we supposed to read that physical disease in the context of what we're talking about today?
What's fascinating here is how that physical diagnosis operates as a profound psychological and spiritual metaphor. In this context, leprosy isn't just a skin condition. It represents hidden internal decay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the physical manifestation of things like deep-seated bitterness, hidden addiction, unforgiveness, and primarily unchecked pride.
So it's the disconnect between the outside and the inside.
Exactly. It's the profound irony of it. Naaman is wearing the uniform of an undefeated conqueror, but underneath that incredibly impressive armor, his own skin is literally rotting away.
And, I mean, isn't that just the human condition in a nutshell? You think about that influencer on the yacht, they're posting the perfect sunset picture, but behind the camera, they're actively going through a brutal, messy divorce.
Right.
Or the executive who just rang the bell at the stock exchange but is completely estranged from their own kids. The world is giving them a standing ovation, but their soul is decaying.
Precisely. It's the sobering reality that you can be highly educated, politically influential, and incredibly wealthy, yet carry a secret sickness that absolutely no amount of money or status can fix.
You cannot buy your way out of soul decay.
You really can't. And that sets up the central conflict for Naaman, because he has a massive wealthy man problem. His natural instinct is to seek a massive wealthy man solution.
Which brings us to his road trip. Because when you have an ego that massive, You don't just quietly ask for help. You make a
Oh,
spectacle.
total spectacle.
So Naaman rolls up to the prophet Elisha's door in Israel like an absolute VIP. I mean, he brings an entourage of horses, chariots, 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and literal letters of recommendation from his king.
He's ready to pay top dollar.
Right. He expects a dramatic, theatrical, red carpet healing. But Elisha absolutely shatters those expectations.
He really does. In fact, Elisha doesn't even bother to come to the front door to greet him.
Honestly, I'm going to be honest, though. If I'm Naaman, I'm furious, too.
Oh, sure.
Let's look at this from his perspective for a second. He's a decorated head of state. He's traveled across borders. He's paying a fortune. He's incredibly vulnerable about this disease. And the resident expert won't even come outside.
It feels like an insult.
Yeah, Elisha's staying inside feels less like a spiritual lesson and more like blatant disrespect. If you're a VIP paying top dollar, isn't it reasonable to expect the expert to at least come to the door? Why does the solution have to involve humiliating the guy?
Well, in a normal, transactional, corporate world, you are absolutely right to be offended. If you pay a premium, you expect the premium service.
Exactly.
But the theological shock value of this exact moment is the entire point. God, through the prophet Elisha, refuses to validate Naaman's ego. The divine solution cannot be purchased, and it cannot be dictated by the patient.
Wow.
So, Elisha sends a lowly servant out to the general with a ridiculously simple prescription. He just says, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored.
That's it.
That's it. This isn't poor customer service.
Yeah.
It is a deliberate, calculated stripping of Naaman's dignity.
It's a total deconstruction of his pride. And looking at the source, it's actually a threefold stripping. First, you have the location, the river itself.
Right, the Jordan River. Historically and geographically, it's muddy, it's shallow, and it's utterly unimpressive. It is not a luxury spa.
Second, you have the action. He's told to wash. And one thing isn't some heroic military feat where he gets to swing a sword and look cool.
No, not at all.
Taking off your armor and washing in public is an open admission that you are fundamentally dirty.
And for a proud, decorated national hero whose entire identity is built on strength and invulnerability, admitting he is utterly filthy and helpless is psychologically the hardest task imaginable. It shatters the facade.
And then third, the number. He has to do it 7 times.
Yeah.
It's tedious. You can't just jump in,
Yeah.
splash some water on your face and say you did it. It requires repetitive, sustained obedience.
Exactly.
So faced with this incredibly insulting, entirely unheroic prescription, Naaman reacts exactly how I think any powerful person would when their ego is threatened like that. He absolutely loses it.
He is livid. He goes away in a blinding rage because he had this entire cinematic narrative built in his head.
Right.
He literally complains. He says, I thought he would surely come out to me, stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the place, and heal the leprosy.
He wanted a performance.
He wanted a magic trick he could logically understand, and more importantly, a formula he felt he was paying for and therefore controlling.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Naaman's specific grievance is about the water itself.
Oh,
He starts yelling, like, are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? He's basically saying, if I just needed to take a bath, I have much cleaner, much more prestigious rivers back home. I didn't need to come to this backwater mud puddle.
Right, it's beneath him.
So why is doing something simple, but seemingly beneath us, actually harder for the human brain to process than doing something spectacular?
That question really gets to the heart of the broader human condition, doesn't it? I mean, Naaman was perfectly willing to die for a great heroic cause on the battlefield,
Sure.
but he was completely unwilling to live through a lowly, humiliating one. When a solution requires us to be seen as helpless, dependent, and completely ordinary, our pride goes into overdrive to protect us from the perceived threat of vulnerability.
We want a religion that looks impressive.
Yes, or a therapy, or a cure that looks impressive to our intellect. We want the clean rivers of our comfort zones. When the actual solution doesn't match our sophisticated expectations, our ego's defense mechanism is to just walk away entirely.
And walk away in a rage, no less. But it's wild to think about the stakes here. I mean, if his pride wins out and he actually rides his chariot home in a huff, he's basically signing his own death warrant, isn't he?
Without a doubt.
Like if Naaman goes home angry, what physically happens to him?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the medical reality of his choice is devastating. Leprosy isn't static, it's highly progressive.
Right.
It doesn't just stay a small, manageable spot under the armor. Physiologically, it attacks the nervous system. It numbs the extremity so you can't feel pain.
Which is terrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
Because that leads to severe injury, brutal disfigurement, and ultimately a slow, agonizing death. Every single day Naaman delays because of his pride, his flesh decays further.
Wow.
And that medical reality perfectly mirrors the spiritual reality of pride and unaddressed trauma.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because psychological decay and sin work the exact same way, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
It starts small.
Yeah.
A little lie to cover your tracks,
Yep.
a tiny bit of resentment toward a coworker, just a minor ethical compromise. You think you have it under control.
But it grows.
Yeah.
It consumes you from the inside out. And just like the medical leprosy numbs the nerves, pride numbs your conscience.
Yeah.
You stop feeling the moral pain of your actions. You start justifying things you never would have tolerated years ago. There's a reason ancient wisdom, like the book of Proverbs, warns that pride goes before destruction.
That is so true.
The very thing that made Naaman great in society's eyes, his fierce self-sufficiency and his towering ego, was the exact mechanism that was going to literally kill him. If he goes home to his clean rivers, he takes his leprosy to the grave.
He dies victorious in battle,
Yeah.
but utterly defeated in body and soul.
Exactly.
But he doesn't go home thanks to what is honestly my favorite part of this whole historical narrative, the intervention of the lowly servants.
Yep.
While the mighty, brilliant billionaire general is throwing a temper tantrum in the dirt, his unnamed, powerless subordinates step in. And their logic is completely unassailable.
It really is.
They basically say to him, listen, if the prophet had asked you to do some great, impossible, heroic thing, you would have done it in a heartbeat. So why won't you do it when he just says, wash and be clean?
It's an incredible irony.
The powerful commander has to be rescued by the sheer common sense of the people at the very bottom of the org chart.
It is a profound irony, and it highlights a recurring theme. The humble often recognize the truth long before the powerful do, because their vision isn't clouded by an ego they have to protect.
Wow, yeah.
The servants see exactly what is happening. They realize that Naaman's pride is an anchor that is actively sinking him. They cut through the noise and essentially tell him, you are willing to do anything massive to save your reputation, but you won't do the one small, embarrassing thing that will actually save your life.
And it works. Convinced by the people at the bottom, the great man finally agrees to do the small thing. And we reach the climax of the story.
Right.
Naaman strips off the impressive armor, the shiny metals, the designer suit, whatever you want to call it in modern terms, and he makes his descent into the muddy Jordan River. He has to dip 7 times.
Yeah.
To me, this is exactly like being prescribed a full, heavy course of antibiotics. You can't just take one pill, wake up the next day and say, well, I don't feel 100% better yet. This doctor's a quack. I'm quitting.
Right, right.
You have to trust the unseen process and finish the whole prescription, even when it feels tedious.
That's a perfect analogy. The number 7 in this context frequently represents divine completion and wholeness. Naaman didn't get an instantaneous magical fix on dip number 1, or 2, or 6.
He had to keep going.
Exactly. Each of those descents into the muddy water required an incremental act of faith and a continuous, agonizing stripping of his pride. He had to keep trusting the process even when he looked utterly ridiculous, even when his soldiers were watching, and even when he wasn't seeing immediate results.
And think about the physical progression of that moment.
Yeah.
He had to physically go down into the mud to come up healed.
Yes.
And when he comes up that 7th time, his flesh is restored. But the text doesn't just say his skin cleared up. It specifically says his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child.
And that imagery is vital. The stripping produced the cleansing. He had to be reduced to a state of childlike vulnerability, lowly, dependent, without any armor, completely helpless in order to be entirely new.
It's a complete reset.
It is. This was not merely a dermatological cure. It was a total structural worldview shift.
Right. Because Naaman emerges from that muddy water declaring that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. It's what you could call a testimony in motion.
Exactly. He traded his ego for grace. He walked into that water as a furious, entitled, leprous general, and he came out as a cleansed, humbled worshiper.
Incredible.
His physical healing was actually secondary to his spiritual transformation. His testimony was set in motion because he finally, agonizingly, chose to move from pride to humility.
So what does this all mean for us today? Because, I mean, we can't just leave this as a cool historical anecdote about a guy taking a bath in the Middle East.
No, definitely not.
The dynamic of this story applies directly to our modern lives. It forces us to ask, where is God or where is life asking you to strip your pride today? because we all have our own modern-day Jordans that we are desperately trying to avoid.
We do. And the modern applications of this are incredibly confronting because they target the exact areas where we feel the most justified in our pride.
Yeah. Let's look at the first one from the source. The relational Jordan. This is the scenario where the cure for your conflict or your broken marriage is simply to apologize first. You're sitting there waiting for the other person to make the move, nursing your grievances, building a whole legal case in your head about why you are right. Why does our brain fight so hard against saying, I was wrong?
Because apologizing is a mini death to the ego.
Oof. Yeah.
It requires you to lay down your armor of self-righteousness. When we hold a grudge, we feel powerful, right? We feel like we are in control of the narrative. But refusing to forgive or apologize allows bitterness to rot your relational soul, exactly like leprosy.
Exactly like it.
Stepping into the relational Jordan means humbling yourself, looking foolish, making the first move, and actively choosing peace over the pride of being right.
And then there's the financial Jordan. This is about choosing radical generosity with the pride of ownership. We live in a culture that basically equates net worth with self-worth.
Sad but true.
So holding tightly to resources out of fear or out of a need for control and status is just another form of spiritual decay. Giving sacrificially is basically stripping away your sense of financial self-sufficiency. It's admitting that your security doesn't actually come from your bank account.
And finally, there is the spiritual Jordan.
Right.
This is for the person who is holding out for some spectacular, cinematic, spiritual encounter. Maybe they want a booming voice from the clouds or a massive emotional high at a conference.
They want Elisha waving his hands over the spot.
Exactly. But they flatly refuse to do the quiet, everyday work of obedience. They won't pray the unimpressive prayer. They won't serve the unnoticed person. They won't just quietly love their neighbor. The pursuit of the spectacular actually keeps them completely stagnant.
These modern examples all point toward this really sobering cultural concept we have to talk about from the source material. It's called the successful dead. That phrase just grabbed my attention and wouldn't let go. The successful dead.
It's a haunting paradox, isn't it? We live in a society where people are dying highly educated, incredibly wealthy, ridiculously famous, and culturally influential, yet internally they are spiritually and emotionally diseased.
Wow.
Why? Because, exactly like Naaman in the beginning of the story, they are frantically searching for a spectacular, impressive miracle while flatly rejecting the simple, humbling commands that would actually heal them.
They want the big show.
Yeah. And this raises an important question. Why do we so consistently prefer the Damascus rivers of the modern world over the muddy Jordan of true transformation?
I think it's because modern society demands cleaner rivers. Think about it. We want motivational speeches that make us feel empowered, but don't require actual repentance.
Okay, entirely.
We want the life hacks and the blessings without the surrender. We want positive thinking without doing the messy, painful work of confronting our own deep character flaws. We've become absolute experts at putting digital filters on our faces and our lives for social media, while our inner private lives remain deeply, desperately unwell.
And that disconnect is arguably the greatest pandemic of our generation. We talk about mental, financial, or political crises, and those are undeniably real, but underneath all of them is the crisis of pride.
Yeah.
The sheer refusal to admit we need help and that we cannot save ourselves. And to really drive this point home, if you look at the historical and theological text of Philippians 2 in the New Testament, it provides the ultimate cosmic contrast to Naaman's initial pride.
Yes, it points to Jesus as the ultimate example of this downward mobility we've been talking about.
Right. According to that text, Jesus didn't cling to his status. He didn't demand the red carpet. He intentionally stripped himself of heavenly glory, took on the incredibly vulnerable form of a servant, and humbled himself to the absolute lowest point, death on a cross.
Incredibly contrast.
A theological argument here is staggering. The divine king willingly stepped all the way down into the muddy waters of human existence to provide this unlikely cure for everyone else. He did what Naaman initially refused to do.
And that perfectly wraps up the core tension we've been exploring today. The messaging of the world, every commercial, every social media feed, constantly tells you to climb higher, promote yourself, hustle harder, build your brand.
Yep.
But the ancient wisdom we're looking at insists on the exact opposite. It says you must kneel lower and deny yourself. If you want the actual cure for your soul, you have to be willing to go down into the mud. Grace isn't found at the peak of your reputation. And it isn't found at the height of your accomplishments. It's waiting at the bottom.
It is a radical, almost offensive subversion of how we measure success and health. But it leaves us with a stark, unavoidable binary choice. You can either fiercely protect your ego and keep your hidden decay, or you can strip your pride and find true restoration.
You really cannot have both.
No.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. We spend so much of our time, our energy, and our money curating our strengths, polishing our resumes, and fiercely hiding our weaknesses from the world. We build these massive walls of success because we think that armor is protecting us.
Right.
But building on what we've unpacked today, what if the very thing you think is your greatest asset? What if your fierce self-sufficiency, your towering intellect, your wealth, or your absolute flawless reputation, what if that is actually the exact barrier preventing you from experiencing the breakthrough, the connection, or the healing you've been most desperately seeking?
That is the ultimate question of the muddy river. Will you let go of your armor to finally be clean?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives around you, keep learning, and when the time comes, we hope you have the courage to step into the muddy waters of your own life. Until next time.